I was absolutely shocked when I woke up at 6:07 a.m. to the sound of an excavator digging a trench straight through the lake on my property. The trespasser, Brenda Whitmore, the HOA president, and also my neighbor, had taken it upon herself to install a water pipe to drain her patio runoff and bathtub water into my lake without ever asking permission. When I confronted her, she dared to tell me that the lake was a common utility for the community and that I was being selfish. But Brenda had no idea what the drainage system of my lake was actually connected to. So, I decided to teach her a lesson she would never forget. Drop a comment below and let me know where you are watching from. The windows rattled so hard I thought something had exploded. I threw off the covers and stumbled across the cold floor, my heart pounding from the sudden violence of being ripped from sleep. Through the glass, I saw the source immediately. A bright yellow excavator was tearing into the earth at the edge of my property, its metal teeth grinding against stone and root, as two workers in orange vests guided a long section of white PVC pipe into a freshly dug trench. The trench ran directly through my lake, cutting across the water like an open wound. I checked my phone, 6:11 a.m. on a Tuesday morning. The sun had barely touched the tree line. No reasonable person schedules construction at this hour, unless they are trying to make a point. I pulled on jeans and headed downstairs, anger building with each step. As I stepped onto my back porch, I understood exactly what kind of point was being made. Brenda Whitmore stood at the edge of my lawn, clipboard in hand, supervising the work like a general overseeing a battlefield conquest. She was 55 years old, president of the Lakewood Heights Homeowners Association, and she had scheduled this intrusion at dawn for one obvious reason. She wanted me to know that she could do whatever she wanted, whenever she wanted, and there was nothing I could do about it. The expensive athletic wear and the tight smile only confirmed what everyone in the neighborhood already knew. Brenda Whitmore believed she owned this community, and the rest of us were simply living in it. I walked toward her, forcing my pace to remain measured even as my jaw tightened. "Good morning, Brenda," I said, keeping my voice level. "Would you mind explaining why an excavator is digging through my lake before sunrise?" She turned to face me, her smile not wavering for even a fraction of a second. "Oh, Garrett, good morning. The HOA has decided to install a community drainage solution, and your lake happens to be in the optimal path for the utility line." I felt heat rising in my chest, the kind of anger that comes when someone violates something that belongs to you and then acts like they have done you a favor. "My lake is on my private property," I said slowly, enunciating each word. "You cannot just dig through it without my permission." Brenda laughed, a sound that scraped against my nerves like sandpaper. "Garrett, I understand you might not be familiar with how things work around here. The HOA has implied easement rights over all water features in the community. It is in the bylaws. This is perfectly legal. I had spent 20 years as a hydraulic engineer before retiring early at 42. I knew water systems the way most people know their own living rooms. So, when I looked at the excavator and the pipe they were laying, I did not just see a violation of my property. I saw a technical disaster waiting to happen. The pipe was an inch-diameter PVC, Schedule 40, stretching approximately 85 feet from Brenda's property line across the shallow end of my lake. They were connecting it to a junction point near the drainage outlet on the far side. That specific junction point made me pause. It sat directly above the underground line that connected to my septic pump system. When I had designed this property's drainage 10 years ago, I had routed the lake overflow and the septic line through a shared pressure junction to save on excavation costs. It was unusual, but perfectly legal. There was just one critical requirement. Any secondary pipe connecting to that junction needed a backflow preventer to stop pressure reversal when the septic pump activated. Without that valve, anything connected to the line would experience significant problems. I studied the pipe more closely and confirmed what I already suspected. No backflow preventer. Brenda's contractors had connected her drainage line directly to my system without installing the one device that would protect her from its consequences. "Do you have a permit for this work?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral despite the satisfaction building in my chest. Brenda waved her hand dismissively. "The HOA does not need permits for community improvements. We have authority under Article 7 of the CC&Rs. I did not argue. I did not raise my voice. Instead, I pulled out my phone and began taking photographs. I captured the excavator from multiple angles, the workers, the trench, the pipes, and the connection point where Brenda's line met my drainage system. "What are you doing?" she demanded, irritation creeping into her voice. "Documenting," I replied simply. "For my records." She rolled her eyes with theatrical exasperation. "You are being ridiculous, Garrett. This is for the good of the community. You should be thanking me instead of acting like a victim." I lowered my phone and looked at her directly, letting the silence stretch until it became uncomfortable. "I will review my deed and the HOA bylaws," I said finally. "If everything is in order, we will have no problem. If not, we will need to discuss remediation." Brenda scoffed and turned on her heel, walking back toward her property without another word. I watched her go, then turned my attention to the junction point where her pipe now connected to my drainage system. From inside my equipment shed, the septic pump control panel was visible through the window. The pressure gauge needle sat at its normal resting position, but I knew it would not stay there forever. The tank was already at 75% capacity. In roughly 10 to 12 hours, it would reach the 80% threshold, and the pump would activate automatically. When that happened, the pressure in the shared line would spike, and without a backflow preventer, the water in Brenda's new pipe would have nowhere to go but backward. I smiled and walked inside to make myself a cup of coffee. Brenda Whitmore had just connected her pristine drainage system directly to my septic line, and she had absolutely no idea what was coming. I spent the rest of that morning doing what any reasonable person would do when someone violates their property rights. I gathered evidence. The filing cabinet in my home office contained every document related to my property purchase, and I pulled out the deed, the plat map, and the complete HOA covenants, conditions, and restrictions packet. I spread them across my dining room table like a surgeon preparing instruments, then grabbed a yellow highlighter and began marking every boundary line and easement notation. The coffee grew cold beside me as I worked, but I did not care. This was the kind of problem solving I had spent my career perfecting, and Brenda Whitmore had just walked into territory where I held every advantage. By 10:30 a.m., I had confirmed what I already suspected. My property extended 14 feet beyond the far edge of the lake, meaning the entire body of water sat squarely within my private land. No easements of any kind were recorded on the plat map. I called the county recorder's office to get official verification. The clerk confirmed within minutes that no easements had been recorded against my property since I purchased it in 2021. Brenda's claim of implied easement rights was a complete fabrication, and now I had a government employee on record confirming it. But I wanted more than proof of her current violation. I wanted to understand whether she had done this before. I called Diana Holloway, a real estate attorney I had known since my engineering days. We had worked together on industrial projects where water rights became contentious, and she understood property law the way I understood hydraulic systems. Diana answered on the second ring. "Garrett Mitchell calling before lunch? This must be interesting." I explained the situation quickly, and when I finished, she let out a low whistle. "Implied easements require historical use and necessity," she said. "You cannot create one by deciding you want to use someone else's property. What she did is textbook trespass. Give me an hour to run her name through some public records databases." While Diana searched, I returned to my original plumbing schematics. I already knew the basic layout from Chapter 1, but now I focused on the specific mechanics of what would happen when systems collided. The junction point where Brenda's pipe connected sat on a shared pressure line that served both the lake overflow and the septic pump discharge. Under normal conditions, water flowed in one direction, but when the septic pump activated, it created a sudden pressure spike that changed everything. Without a backflow preventer, any secondary pipe connected to that line would experience a vacuum effect. The pressure differential would pull whatever was in Brenda's pipe backward through the system, drawing it toward the pump discharge point. I grabbed a red pen and circled the connection point on my diagram. The physics were simple and inevitable. Brenda had built herself a pipeline directly into my septic system, and she had no idea. My phone buzzed with an email notification at 2:47 p.m. The sender was Brenda Whitmore, and the subject line read, "Official Notice Regarding Community Improvement Project." I opened it and began reading. "Dear Mr. Mitchell, I understand you have only lived in Lakewood Heights for 3 years, so you may not be familiar with how our community operates. The implied easement rights over water features have existed since the neighborhood was established in 1987. The HOA board held an emergency meeting this afternoon and passed Resolution 23-7, confirming community utility rights over all water resources within Lakewood Heights. If you continue to obstruct this improvement project, the board will impose penalties under Article 7.3.2 of the CC&Rs. The fine is $150 per day for any action that impedes community improvement initiatives. I trust you will reconsider your position. Sincerely, Brenda Whitmore, President, Lakewood Heights, HOA. I checked my inbox carefully. No prior notice of any board meeting had been sent to me or any other homeowner. California Civil Code Section 4920 requires HOA board meetings to have at least 4 days advance notice. Brenda had called her emergency meeting, held it, and passed her resolution all within hours of our confrontation that morning. She had deliberately rushed the process to avoid giving homeowners time to object or even attend. The timestamp on the resolution proved she had manufactured legal cover for her illegal construction after the fact. I added this procedural violation to my growing file, noting the exact timeline. At 4:15 p.m., Diana called back. Her voice carried the focused energy of someone who had found exactly what she was looking for. I ran Brenda Whitmore through the county court records, she said. In 2018, she was named as defendant in a civil lawsuit filed in her previous neighborhood. The plaintiff alleged abuse of HOA authority and unauthorized modifications to private property. I asked how the case ended. Diana paused. That is where it gets interesting. The case was settled out of court with a confidentiality agreement, so the details are sealed, but the plaintiff sold their house 6 months later and moved out of state. I am still digging, but the pattern is clear. Brenda had done this before. She had bullied a homeowner, faced legal consequences, and escaped through a settlement that buried the evidence. The confidentiality agreement meant the new neighborhood never knew about her history when she moved here and ran for HOA president. Now she was running the same playbook, confident that her position would protect her from accountability. I thanked Diana and ended the call, then sat in silence for a long moment. The email on my screen glowed with Brenda's threats about daily fines and community cooperation. She expected me to fold the way her previous victim had folded. She expected a quiet settlement and my eventual retreat. I walked to my equipment shed and checked the septic pump control panel. The tank level had risen to 77% since morning. At the current rate, it would reach the 80% activation threshold by early tomorrow morning. The pump would kick on automatically, pressure would spike in the shared line, and physics would take over from there. I did not need to do anything. I did not need to confront Brenda or respond to her threatening email. The system I had designed 10 years ago would handle everything on its own. I returned to the house and poured myself a glass of whiskey, watching the sunset paint the lake in shades of orange and gold. Somewhere beneath that peaceful water, Brenda's illegal pipe waited like a loaded gun pointed at her own front yard. Some lessons I had learned are best taught by physics. The next morning, I decided to take a drive into town. I needed coffee that I had not made myself, and I needed time to think through my options before Brenda's planned inauguration of her drainage system. The local cafe on Main Street had become my regular spot since moving to Lakewood Heights, a quiet place where I could sit by the window and watch the world go by. I ordered my usual black coffee and settled into a corner booth with my phone, scrolling through emails and mentally organizing the evidence I had compiled. That was when I noticed a woman in a navy blazer talking to the barista about real estate in our area. I recognized her immediately. Jennifer Walsh, one of the top agents in the county, had sold 3 houses on my street in the past year alone. When she mentioned something about lake properties and HOA reclassifications, I set down my cup and listened more carefully. I waited until Jennifer finished her order and headed for the door before standing up and intercepting her path. "Excuse me," I said, keeping my voice friendly but direct. "I am Garrett Mitchell. I own a lakefront property in Lakewood Heights, and I could not help but overhear you mention something about water features and HOA designations." Jennifer's face shifted through surprise and then professional caution. "Mr. Mitchell," she said carefully, "I apologize if I was speaking too loudly. I really cannot discuss client matters in public." I nodded understandingly. "I am not asking you to break confidentiality, but I have reason to believe someone in my neighborhood is trying to manipulate property values through fraudulent HOA resolutions. If you have any information that could help me understand what is happening, I would appreciate it." Jennifer studied me for a moment, then glanced around the cafe. "Let me buy you a coffee," she said quietly. "There are some things you should probably know." We sat at a corner table away from other customers, and Jennifer spoke carefully, choosing her words with the precision of someone who understood legal liability. 2 weeks ago, a homeowner in Lakewood Heights contacted me about listing her property. She wanted an appraisal that assumed lake access rights would be established before the sale. I asked who the homeowner was, though I already knew the answer. Jennifer hesitated, then said, "I cannot confirm names, but this person told me she had a plan to establish a physical and legal connection to a neighboring lake through her position in the HOA. She was very confident it would add significant value to her listing." Jennifer paused and looked me directly in the eyes. "Mr. Mitchell, if the lake on your property is being targeted, you should know that establishing access rights to waterfront features can increase adjacent property values by $40,000 to $50,000 in this market. That is a lot of motivation for someone willing to bend the rules." I thanked Jennifer for her honesty and left the cafe with a new understanding of what I was dealing with. Brenda had not built that drainage pipe because she needed somewhere to dump her patio runoff. She had built it to create physical evidence of a connection to my lake, a connection she could use to justify access rights on her property listing. The HOA resolution was not administrative housekeeping. It was manufactured documentation for real estate fraud. Everything she had done, the early morning construction, the threatening emails, the rushed board vote, was part of a calculated scheme to steal value from my property and transfer it to hers. This was not a neighbor dispute. This was premeditated theft disguised as community improvement, and she had used her position as HOA president to make it look legitimate. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Mr. Mitchell, this is Carl Jennings from the HOA board. I need to speak with you privately. Can you meet me at Riverside Park in 1 hour?" I recognized the name and typed back a confirmation. An hour later, I found Carl sitting on a bench near the park's walking trail, looking uncomfortable. He was a heavy-set man in his late 40s, wearing a polo shirt that suggested he had come straight from work. When he saw me approaching, he stood and extended his hand. "Thank you for meeting me," he said quietly. "What happened at that board meeting was wrong, and I cannot stay silent about it." I asked what had prompted his change of heart. Carl sighed heavily. "My daughter is a paralegal. When I told her about the resolution we passed, she went pale and said we had probably just helped Brenda commit fraud. She made me promise to fix it before it got worse." Carl explained that Brenda had called the emergency meeting with barely any notice, texting board members individually rather than sending a proper notification to all homeowners. She had presented the resolution as routine administrative business, never mentioning my name or property specifically. "She just talked about water resources and community access," Carl said. "I voted yes because I thought it was harmless. Then I saw the threatening email she sent you, and I realized what she had actually done." He pulled out his phone and showed me the text chain from Brenda. The timestamp confirmed she had sent the meeting notice at 11:22 a.m., barely 36 hours before the vote. California law required 4 days advance notice for board meetings. Brenda had deliberately violated the notification requirement to prevent homeowners from attending or objecting. I photographed the text chain as evidence. Carl agreed to testify about the improper procedure if the matter went to court. "Brenda has a way of making life difficult for people who cross her," he admitted. "But my daughter reminded me that staying quiet makes me complicit. I would rather deal with Brenda's anger than explain to a judge why I helped her commit fraud." I thanked Carl and walked back to my car, my evidence file growing thicker by the hour. As I drove home, my phone buzzed again with an official email from the HOA. Brenda had issued a formal fine notice, $150 per day beginning on day 7 of my alleged obstruction. If I did not cease my interference within 30 days, I would owe $4,500 in penalties. The email included a payment link and a deadline. I closed the message without responding. According to the neighborhood newsletter, Brenda planned to inaugurate her drainage system tomorrow morning by running water through it for the first time. She called it a celebration of community cooperation. I walked to my equipment shed and checked the septic pump control panel. The tank level had risen to 79% overnight and would cross the activation threshold by early morning. Brenda's pipe sat connected to my drainage system with no protection against what would happen when the pressure changed. I had 2 choices: file a lawsuit and spend months in court, or let the system I had designed 10 years ago deliver its own verdict. Tomorrow morning was going to be very educational. That evening, I organized every piece of evidence I had collected over the past 2 days into a single comprehensive file. The deed, photographs, emails, Carl's screenshots, and my notes from Jennifer's conversation filled a folder thick enough to make any attorney smile. 20 years as an engineer had taught me that documentation wins battles, and I intended to have an airtight case no matter which direction this conflict went. I called Diana to walk her through what I had compiled, and she listened carefully, occasionally asking clarifying questions about dates and documents. When I finished, she let out a low whistle. "Garrett, you have enough here to file a civil lawsuit for trespass, property damage, and potentially fraud. I can draft a cease and desist letter tonight if you want to put Brenda on formal notice." I thanked her, but explained I was considering a different approach. "What if I just let her proceed with her plan tomorrow morning?" I asked. Diana was silent for a moment. "What do you mean, let her proceed?" I explained the technical situation, how Brenda's pipe connected directly to my drainage system without any protection against pressure reversal, and what would happen when the septic pump activated. Diana listened, then laughed softly. "So, you are saying her own illegal construction is going to backfire on her?" "Literally." I confirmed that was exactly what I was saying. Diana paused, and I could almost hear her legal mind working through the implications. "Here is the key question. Garrett, have you modified your system in any way since she connected to it? Changed any settings? Adjusted any valves? Done anything that could be construed as intentional interference?" I told her I had not touched anything. "Then you bear no liability," she said firmly. "Your system has been operating the same way for 10 years. She connected to it without permission and without understanding what she was connecting to. Whatever happens is a consequence of her own actions." Diana advised me to document everything that happened tomorrow with video evidence, then wished me luck and hung up. I was about to start organizing my notes when my phone buzzed with a notification from the neighborhood community board. Someone had posted about me, and comments were flooding in. I opened the app and felt my stomach tighten. Brenda had written a lengthy post describing me as a selfish newcomer who refused to share resources with the community. She claimed I was blocking a vital drainage improvement that would benefit everyone, and she encouraged neighbors to reach out and help me understand the importance of community cooperation. The timing was deliberate. She wanted public opinion firmly on her side before tomorrow's inauguration, so that when she ran water through her new system, the community would celebrate her vision rather than question her methods. The post had 47 reactions and 23 comments, almost all supporting Brenda. One neighbor called me a hermit. Another suggested I should move back to wherever I came from. I set down my phone and walked to the window, looking out at the quiet street. 3 years I had lived here, keeping to myself but never causing problems. Now I was being painted as the villain because I objected to someone digging through my private property. This was classic manipulation, turning the community against me so I would feel isolated and pressured to comply. The next morning, I found an envelope tucked under my windshield wiper. Inside was an unsigned note written in block letters. "Cooperate for the good of everyone. Do not make this harder than it needs to be." I photographed the note and added it to my evidence file. Someone had escalated from online criticism to anonymous intimidation overnight, but instead of feeling threatened, I felt calm. Every aggressive action Brenda and her supporters took only strengthened my case and confirmed the pattern of bullying behavior. I spent the afternoon making final preparations. I positioned my security camera to capture a clear view of the lake and the connection point where Brenda's pipe met my drainage system, ensuring it would record everything during her planned inauguration. I reviewed my plumbing diagram one last time, confirming what I already knew. Her contractors had skipped the one device that would have protected her from the consequences of connecting to a shared pressure line. That single oversight was about to become very expensive. According to Brenda's announcement in the neighborhood newsletter, her inauguration was scheduled for 7:30 a.m. She planned to run water through her new drainage system as a symbolic celebration of community cooperation, with neighbors invited to witness the moment. I set my alarm for 6:45 and went to bed early. That night, I checked the septic pump control panel one final time. The tank level sat at 80%, right at the activation threshold. Based on normal usage patterns, the pump would most likely kick on during the early morning hours when water consumption peaks. The timing could not have been more perfect. Brenda had scheduled her celebration for the exact window when my system was primed to activate. I lay in the darkness, listening to the quiet hum of the house settling around me. No anger, no anxiety, only patience. Brenda Whitmore had spent weeks planning her scheme, manipulating systems, and bullying neighbors into compliance. She had done everything except understand the one system that actually mattered. Tomorrow morning, physics would deliver a verdict that no lawyer could appeal and no community post could spin. I closed my eyes and smiled. Some mistakes teach themselves. I woke at 6:40 a.m. and lay still for a moment, listening to the familiar sounds of the neighborhood waking up. A car engine is starting somewhere down the street. Birds are calling from the trees near the lake. And beneath it all, the faint mechanical hum from my equipment shed told me the septic pump was primed and ready. I got dressed quickly and walked to the kitchen window. Brenda's backyard was already buzzing with activity. She had sent a reminder through the neighborhood newsletter last night, urging everyone to join her at 7:30 a.m. for what she called a historic moment in community cooperation. Workers were setting up folding chairs while early arrivals milled around a refreshment table. I poured coffee into a travel mug and stepped onto my back porch, where my security camera blinked steadily from its mount. The morning air carried the scent of damp grass and the earthy smell of the lake. I checked my phone. 7:18 a.m., 12 minutes until showtime. More neighbors arrived as the minutes ticked by, greeting each other with smiles and handshakes. I counted at least 15 people gathered on Brenda's patio, all of them apparently eager to witness the inauguration of her drainage project. From my porch, I could hear fragments of conversation praising Brenda's leadership and expressing excitement about the new system. No one glanced in my direction. That was fine. I preferred to observe from a distance. At 7:23 a.m., Brenda raised her hand for attention and began a short speech. Her gestures were theatrical, sweeping toward the lake and then toward the pipe outlet near her patio. The crowd applauded politely. Then she walked to her outdoor faucet, where a hose connected to the drainage inlet of her new pipe. She turned to face her audience with a triumphant smile and twisted the faucet handle. Water began flowing through the hose and into the pipe, rushing down through the PVC that crossed my lake and connected to my drainage system. For about 45 seconds, everything worked exactly as Brenda had planned. The water flowed smoothly, disappearing into the ground near her patio. Neighbors clapped. Brenda beamed with satisfaction, spreading her arms wide as if accepting an award. Then my septic pump kicked on. I heard the low mechanical thrum from the equipment shed as the pump activated. The pressure in the shared line spiked instantly, and without any protection on Brenda's connection, the physics took over. The first sign was a gurgling sound from her pipe outlet, loud enough that several neighbors turned to look with puzzled expressions. Then the outlet began to sputter, spitting air and foam. What happened next lasted only about 10 seconds, but it felt like slow motion. A geyser of dark brown liquid erupted from the drainage inlet and sprayed across Brenda's pristine patio. The smell hit the crowd immediately, thick and unmistakable. Neighbors stumbled backward, hands flying to cover their noses and mouths. Someone knocked over the refreshment table while trying to escape. A woman in a white sundress shrieked as brown droplets splattered across her clothes. Brenda stood frozen in the center of the chaos, her expensive athletic wear now stained and dripping, her face locked in an expression of pure incomprehension. By the time the pump cycle completed and the flow stopped, her backyard looked like something from a nightmare. Brown puddles spread across the patio stones. Folding chairs lay overturned in the mess. The celebratory atmosphere had transformed into horrified silence. Brenda's head snapped toward my property, her eyes searching until they found me on my porch. For a long moment, she just stared, her chest heaving as she processed what had happened. Then she started walking toward the property line, her steps unsteady, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. "How?" she said, her voice barely above a whisper when she reached speaking distance. "How is this possible? The contractors checked everything. They said the connection was secure." Her tone was not accusatory yet. It was bewildered, almost pleading, as if she genuinely could not understand how her perfect plan had gone so catastrophically wrong. I pulled out the plumbing diagram I had prepared and unfolded it so she could see. "Your contractor's connected to my drainage outlet," I said calmly. "That outlet shares a pressure line with my septic system. When the pump activates, it creates a reversal effect in any unprotected secondary pipe." Brenda's eyes moved across the diagram, following the lines I had circled days ago. Her face cycled through confusion, then realization, then something that looked like the beginning of panic. "No," she said, shaking her head slowly. "No, no, no, this cannot be happening. I have buyers coming to view the house next week. I have the HOA resolution. I have everything planned." She was talking to herself now, the carefully constructed facade crumbling in real time. Behind her, neighbors were pulling out their phones, recording the aftermath and the confrontation. I could see Carl Jennings standing at the edge of the crowd, his expression grim but unsurprised. "You need to call a plumber and a hazmat cleaning service," I told Brenda, "and I would suggest talking to a lawyer before you do anything else. Your pipe was installed on my private property without permission, and what just happened is a direct consequence of that illegal construction." Brenda looked at the diagram again, then at the brown stains covering her clothes and yard, then at the neighbors watching with their phones raised. The full weight of her situation was clearly settling onto her shoulders. She had invited the entire neighborhood to witness her triumph, and instead, they had witnessed her humiliation. Every detail would be discussed and shared and remembered. Her carefully cultivated reputation as a community leader had just been covered in sewage in front of everyone who mattered. "This is not over," she said quietly, but there was no conviction in her voice. It sounded more like a prayer than a threat. I folded my diagram and tucked it under my arm. "I agree," I replied. "I think this is just beginning." I turned and walked back to my porch, where my coffee was still warm and my security camera had captured everything. Behind me, I could hear Brenda beginning to cry. The emergency HOA meeting was scheduled for 7 p.m. that Saturday, 3 days after the sewage incident. Brenda had called it herself, apparently believing she could still control the narrative if she got in front of the community quickly enough. I arrived at the community center 15 minutes early, carrying a laptop bag and a folder of documents. The room was already filling up. Far more people than typically attended these meetings. Word had spread quickly, and curiosity had drawn residents who normally avoided community politics. I spotted Carl Jennings near the front, looking uncomfortable but resolute. Near the back sat Raymond Burke, the county building inspector I had invited specifically for this occasion. His official badge glinted under the fluorescent lights. Brenda stood at the front of the room, trying to project confidence, but I could see the strain beneath the surface. Her smile was too tight, her gestures too controlled. When she called the meeting to order, her voice carried a slight tremor. "Thank you all for coming," she began. "As you know, there was an unfortunate incident earlier this week. I have called this meeting to address concerns and to reaffirm the HOA's commitment to neighborhood improvement." She paused, scanning the crowd. "Before we begin, I want to make clear that this situation was caused by circumstances beyond anyone's reasonable expectation." I raised my hand and stood without waiting to be acknowledged. "Madam President, I have prepared materials that the community deserves to see before making any judgments." Brenda's eyes narrowed, but she could not refuse without looking like she had something to hide. "Very well, Mr. Mitchell, you have 5 minutes." I walked to the front and connected my laptop to the projector. The first slide appeared, showing my property deed and the plat map. I said nothing, letting the audience absorb the clear boundary lines that showed the lake entirely within my private land. Murmurs began immediately. The second slide displayed time-stamped photographs of the excavator at 6:07 a.m. More murmurs, louder this time. Someone in the back whispered, "She never asked permission." The third slide showed Brenda's threatening email about implied easement rights and daily fines. I watched faces change as people read the words for themselves. Shock, confusion, anger. Brenda stepped forward. "This is being taken completely out of context," she interrupted, her voice rising. "That email was standard HOA communication. Every president sends notices like that," but no one was looking at her. They were still staring at the screen, reading and rereading the threats she had put in writing. I clicked to the fourth slide. Carl's text message screenshots proving the board meeting had been called with only 36 hours notice. Carl stood up before I could explain. "I was not given adequate time to review anything," he said loudly. "I was told it was routine. I never saw these documents until after I voted." The murmurs became open conversation. People were turning to each other, shaking their heads. Brenda's face had gone pale. I continued clicking, showing the security camera footage of the sewage eruption, watching it play on the large screen, with full audio of screams and chaos. Several audience members gasped despite having heard the story secondhand. Then came the final slide, my notes documenting Brenda's plan to establish lake access rights before listing her house for a significant property value increase. This was not a community improvement project, I said clearly. It was a scheme to benefit one homeowner at the expense of my property rights. The room erupted. People were talking over each other, some demanding explanations, others expressing outrage. Brenda stood frozen at the side of the room, her mouth opening and closing without sound. I gestured for Raymond Burke to join me at the front. He walked forward slowly, notepad in hand. Mr. Burke is a licensed county building inspector, I announced. I asked him to provide an objective assessment of the construction performed on my property. Raymond spoke in the calm tone of someone who had testified in many proceedings. I have reviewed the installation, he said. The pipe was connected without a permit, without a licensed contractor on record, and without the required backflow prevention device. These are violations of California Health and Safety Code Section 5411, which governs sewage discharge into water features. He paused. Penalties under this code can reach $10,000 per day, and cleanup costs for incidents of this nature typically range from $8,500 to $12,000. The responsible party would need to address all of these issues. Brenda finally found her voice, but it came out high and strained. "This is not fair," she said, her words tumbling over each other. "I was trying to help everyone. I was trying to improve the neighborhood. Why is everyone acting like I committed a crime?" No one answered. The silence was worse than any accusation. A woman in the second row stood up. "I move that we vote to rescind Resolution 23-7 immediately." The motion was seconded before Brenda could object. The vote was swift and decisive, 47 in favor, 3 opposed. Brenda sat down heavily, her hands trembling visibly. Carl Jennings stood again. "I move that we schedule a vote of no confidence in the current HOA president, to be held at our next regular meeting in accordance with proper notification requirements." Brenda's head snapped up. "You cannot do this to me," she said, but her voice cracked on the last word. "After everything I have done for this community, after all the time I have given, you are going to throw me out because of one mistake." The room remained silent. A few people looked away, uncomfortable with witnessing someone's public unraveling, but no one spoke in her defense. The motion was seconded and approved for scheduling. The meeting adjourned in clusters of urgent conversation, neighbors glancing toward Brenda, who remained seated alone as the room emptied around her. Her carefully constructed world was collapsing in real time, and everyone could see it. I packed up my laptop and walked past her without speaking. There was nothing left to say. The evidence had spoken, and the community had rendered its verdict. The vote of no confidence was scheduled for the following Thursday at 7 p.m., exactly 1 week after the emergency meeting. The community center was even more crowded than before, with residents filling every seat and lining the walls. Some had brought folding chairs from home. Others stood in the doorway, craning their necks to see the front of the room. I had heard rumors that a reporter from the local newspaper might attend after receiving tips about the story, and when I spotted an unfamiliar woman with a notepad near the back, I understood the stakes had risen beyond our little neighborhood. The atmosphere was charged with anticipation, the kind of energy that builds when people sense they are about to witness something significant. Brenda sat in the front row, her posture rigid, wearing a professional blazer and pearl earrings as if preparing for a job interview rather than her own public removal. Carl Jennings called the proceedings to order and explained the rules. The motion had been properly noticed, discussion would be permitted, and Brenda would have an opportunity to speak before the vote. Several neighbors spoke first, some expressing disappointment, others questioning whether removal was too harsh. But the tide was clearly against her. When the last speaker sat down, Carl turned to Brenda. "Ms. Whitmore, you have the floor." She rose slowly, smoothing her blazer as she walked to the front. For a moment, she stood in silence, scanning the faces of neighbors she had led for 3 years. I expected an apology, a plea for understanding. Instead, something shifted in her expression. The controlled facade cracked. "You want to know what I think?" she began, her voice tight. "I think every single person in this room is ungrateful. Do you have any idea how much time I have spent on this community? How many hours have I given while you were all enjoying your weekends?" Her voice was rising now, and people shifted uncomfortably. "And now you want to throw me out because of one project, One project that was supposed to help everyone. She pointed at me, her finger trembling. He knew what would happen. He sat there and watched. But instead of holding him accountable, you treat him like a hero. Carl tried to intervene. Ms. Whitmore, perhaps we should focus on the specific issues. But Brenda was beyond listening. 3 years of carefully maintained control were unraveling in real time, and she could not stop herself. You want to know the real reason, she continued, her voice cracking. I needed to sell my house. I needed that lake on my listing. Do you think I enjoyed being president? Spending my evenings listening to complaints about fence heights? She laughed bitterly, a sound that bordered on hysteria. I did it because I needed people to trust me. I needed the authority to make things happen for myself. The room had gone completely silent. Brenda seemed to suddenly realize what she had just admitted. Her face went pale. That is not what I meant, she said quickly, but the words kept tumbling out. I meant it would benefit everyone, all our property values. I was trying to help, but no one was buying it anymore. The mask had slipped, and everyone had seen what was underneath. I stood up slowly, holding the photograph I had taken on the first morning, the excavator tearing through my property. Ms. Whitmore, I said calmly, from day one, I asked you a simple question. Do you have a permit? You told me the HOA did not need one. I held up the photo briefly so the room could see. You knew you were trespassing. You knew you were violating codes. And you just admitted, in front of everyone here, exactly why you did it. Brenda opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. She stood frozen, her world collapsing in front of everyone she had tried to impress. The reporter in the back was writing furiously, capturing every word. Carl cleared his throat. I think we have heard enough. All those in favor of removing Brenda Whitmore from the position of HOA president, please raise your hands. The hands went up across the room, a forest of arms stretching toward the ceiling. Carl counted carefully. 52 in favor, all those opposed. A single hand rose, Brenda's own, trembling in the air. 1 opposed. The motion carries. Brenda Whitmore is hereby removed, effective immediately. The room remained silent. No applause, no commentary. Brenda gathered her purse and walked toward the door, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor. No one called after her. No one offered comfort. She simply walked out into the night, alone, the door closing behind her with a soft click that echoed in the stillness. Within 24 hours, the story had spread far beyond Lakewood Heights. The newspaper article described HOA overreach and the dangers of concentrated power in homeowner associations. Neighbors who had never attended a single meeting were suddenly discussing governance and accountability. Brenda Whitmore had become a cautionary tale, her name synonymous with petty tyranny. I watched the aftermath unfold from my back porch, looking out at the lake that had started all of this. The water was calm and clear, reflecting the morning sky. Across that water, Brenda's house sat empty and silent, a for sale sign already planted in the front yard. She had not waited for the cleanup, or the fines, or the legal proceedings. She had simply listed the property and disappeared, leaving behind only the buried pipe and the wreckage of her reputation. The community had delivered its verdict, and there was no appeal. 6 weeks later, I woke to the sound of an excavator, for a moment, lying in the early morning darkness. The noise transported me back to that first Tuesday when everything had begun. But this time, when I walked to the window, the scene was different. The excavator was on Brenda's former property, and it was digging up the pipe rather than laying it down. The workers moved efficiently, pulling sections of white PVC from the trench that crossed my lake and loading them onto a flatbed truck. I made coffee and watched from my porch as the evidence of Brenda's scheme was systematically erased from the landscape. By noon, the trench had been filled in, and the ground smoothed over. The lake looked as it had before any of this started, calm and undisturbed and entirely mine. The doorbell rang at 3 p.m. I opened the door to find Brenda Whitmore standing on my porch, looking nothing like the woman who had once commanded the neighborhood with such confidence. She wore simple clothes, no expensive athletic wear or pearl earrings. Her face was drawn, and her eyes carried the weight of someone who had spent weeks confronting the consequences of her choices. She held an envelope in her hands. "May I come in?" she asked quietly. I stepped aside and let her enter. We sat in my living room, the afternoon light streaming through the windows that overlooked the now peaceful lake. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. "I came to apologize," she finally said, Not because my lawyer told me to, because I needed to say it. She set the envelope on the coffee table between us. That is the compensation for the damage to your property. $3,200. I know it does not fix everything, but it is a start. I picked up the envelope but did not open it. The county fines? I asked. She nodded slowly. $4,500, plus the cleanup and remediation costs, which came to $9,200, and the excavation crew today charged $1,800. She paused, calculating. Altogether, I have paid out over $18,000 for a pipe that was supposed to make me money. The irony was not lost on either of us. I asked what she planned to do now. Brenda looked out the window at the lake, her expression distant. I sold the house last week. The buyers got it for $40,000 below what I had originally hoped to list it for. The scandal made negotiations difficult. She smiled bitterly. So, in the end, I lost more than I ever could have gained. My reputation, my position, my neighbors, and a significant amount of money, all because I thought I was smarter than everyone else. She stood to leave, then paused at the door. I know I cannot undo what I did, but I want you to know that I have learned something from this. About boundaries, about respect, about what happens when you treat other people's property like it belongs to you. I nodded, but said nothing. Some lessons do not require commentary. A week later, the new family moved into Brenda's former house. They were young, enthusiastic, and completely unaware of the drama that had unfolded before their arrival. I watched the moving truck from my porch, feeling the quiet satisfaction of a chapter finally closed. That evening, I walked down to the lake and stood at the water's edge. The surface was glass smooth, reflecting the sunset in shades of orange and pink. I pulled a single leaf from a nearby tree and let it fall onto the water, watching it drift slowly toward the center. No pipes interrupted its path, no pumps disturbed the stillness, just water, and sky, and peace. The next morning, I knocked on the new neighbor's door with a housewarming gift in my hands. They answered together, smiling and curious. I introduced myself and handed them a small wrapped package. Inside was a backflow preventer, the device that would have saved Brenda $18,000 and her entire reputation. Attached was a note that read, "Welcome to the neighborhood. If you ever need advice about plumbing, I am right next door." They laughed, not understanding the joke, but someday, when they heard the story from other neighbors, they would. Carl Jennings had been elected the new HOA president, and his first act was proposing a regulation requiring permits and affected property owner consent for any construction involving water systems. The motion passed unanimously. The community had learned its lesson, and the rules had changed to prevent anyone from repeating Brenda's mistake. Justice had been served, not through anger or revenge, but through truth, patience, and the simple laws of physics. Sometimes, the best revenge is letting people face the consequences of their own choices. Brenda built an illegal pipe through my lake and discovered the hard way what it was connected to. If you enjoyed watching karma deliver justice, make sure to subscribe to HOA Justice and hit that notification bell. More stories of neighbors learning expensive lessons are coming soon.